Mm. The morning I found out, I was standing in my kitchen at 6 a.m., coffee in hand, watching the sun come up over the back fence. It was a Tuesday. I remember because Tuesday is when I usually check my statements. Not out of anxiety, just habit. 62 years on this earth will teach you that no one watches your money the way you do. Not your bank, not your financial advisor. And certainly, as I was about to learn, not your wife. I opened the app. I scrolled down, and I stood there so still that my coffee went cold. I want to back up, because the ending of this story only makes sense if you understand how it started. And it started the way most slow disasters do, with something that seemed perfectly reasonable at the time. My wife and I had been married for 4 years. I was 58 when we got together, divorced once before, cautious in the way that men who've been hurt tend to become cautious. Not cold, just careful. She was 54, warm, funny, the kind of woman who remembered your coffee order and asked real questions when she wanted to know how you were doing. I thought I had picked well the second time. I thought I had finally gotten it right. She had a daughter, 31 years old. I'll call her my stepdaughter, though that word never quite fit. We were never close enough for it to feel true. Her name isn't important. What's important is that she had been, for most of her adult life, what I'd call directionless, not cruel, not a bad person, just someone who floated. She'd had several jobs over the years, none of them lasting more than 8 or 9 months. She'd had a couple of relationships, both of which ended with her moving back in with her mother. She had a car that was always one repair away from being undrivable, and a credit history that, from what little I gathered, was not something she brought up in polite conversation. When my wife and I got married, her daughter was living in an apartment about 40 minutes away with a roommate. That arrangement lasted about 7 months into our marriage. The roommate moved out. The daughter couldn't cover the rent alone. And so one evening, my wife sat down across from me at the kitchen table with that particular expression I had come to recognize. Soft eyes, careful posture, a kind of pre-apology already built into her face. She needed a place to stay, just temporarily, just until she got back on her feet. 3 months, maybe 4. She would contribute to groceries. She would stay out of our way. I want to be honest about this part. I said yes because I loved my wife, and because the version of the situation that was presented to me sounded manageable. 3 months, groceries, back on her feet. That was 2.5 years before the Tuesday I stood in my kitchen, watching the numbers on my phone not make sense. She never paid for groceries, she never got back on her feet, not in any meaningful way. In the first year, she had one part-time job at a coffee shop that lasted 11 weeks. After that, she did some occasional babysitting for a neighbor, which brought in maybe $80 or $90 a week on a good week. The rest of the time, she was home, using the internet, ordering things, watching television on the 65-inch screen in the living room that I had bought the year before we got married, and that now, somehow, felt less like mine than it used to. The ordering was something I noticed gradually. A box here, a package there. At first I assumed it was personal things, toiletries, maybe clothes, the ordinary small purchases of a woman in her 30s. I didn't ask. It felt intrusive to ask. She was a grown adult living under my roof, and I didn't want to be the kind of man who stood at the door cataloging deliveries. But then I started noticing the boxes were not small. Some of them were significant. A kitchen appliance she used twice. A piece of exercise equipment that migrated from her room to the garage within a month. Skincare products that I recognized from advertisements as being the kind that cost more than they should. And through it all, my wife said nothing. When I mentioned it once, gently, she told me her daughter was trying to build a good life for herself and that having nice things made her feel better about everything she'd been through. I let it go. That was my first real mistake, not speaking clearly when I still had the goodwill to do it calmly. The financial arrangement in our marriage was this. We had a joint account for household expenses, mortgage, utilities, groceries, that kind of thing. My pension and the income from some investments I had made over the years went into that account. My wife worked part-time as a bookkeeper for a small business, and her income went in as well. Separately, I kept a personal checking account that I had held since long before the marriage, one I used for my own discretionary spending, golf, books, the occasional trip with my brother. I did not keep that account secret. My wife knew it existed. What I had not done was examine closely enough what either of us considered to be the natural boundary between those two accounts. That was my second mistake. About 18 months into my stepdaughter's stay, I noticed the joint account running lower than it should. Not dramatically, not in a way that set off alarms, just lower. I mentioned it to my wife and she said she'd had some extra expenses, car maintenance, a doctor's visit. I believed her. She had never given me reason not to. 3 months later, it happened again. This time, I looked more carefully. There were charges I didn't recognize. Not enormous ones, but consistent. A streaming subscription I hadn't authorized. Delivery fees from restaurants I had never heard of. A charge from what appeared to be an online clothing retailer, $212. Another from somewhere that sold home goods, $340. I asked my wife about them. She paused before answering. She said her daughter had needed a few things and she had helped her out. She said it the way you might say you'd lent someone an umbrella. Casual, as though the scale of it was obvious and the explanation was barely necessary. I told her that these were household funds and I would appreciate being consulted before they were used for personal gifts. She said she understood. She kissed me on the cheek. I thought we were on the same page. We were not on the same page. Over the next several months, I started paying closer attention. I started keeping a small log, nothing elaborate, just a note on my phone when I saw something that didn't belong. The charges kept appearing. They evolved. What had been $200 clothing purchases became a $400 purchase from a jewelry website. What had been delivery fees became a charge from a spa. I watched it happen, and I want to be honest with myself here. I let it continue too long because confrontation in my first marriage had never gone well, and somewhere in my chest I still carried that old hesitation. The fear that pushing back on something would cost me the whole thing. But here is what changed. My stepdaughter mentioned, offhand, at dinner one evening, a handbag. She'd been looking at it for months, she said. She picked up her phone and showed her mother a picture. It was the kind of handbag that has a logo on it that everyone recognizes. The kind that costs what some people pay for rent. My wife looked at the picture, smiled, and said, "We'll see." 2 weeks later, I saw a charge on the joint account for $680 from a retailer I looked up and confirmed sold exactly that brand of handbag. I didn't say anything at dinner that night. I went to bed and stared at the ceiling for a long time. I thought about the man I had been at 26, my first marriage, my son from that marriage, who had worked his way through community college and never asked me for more than I could give. I thought about what it meant to be 62 years old and still learning the same lessons. The next morning, I made an appointment with my bank. I did not tell my wife. I want to be clear about that, and I want to explain why. By that point, I had raised the issue of the account spending 4 times over the course of a year and a half. Each time I had been heard, acknowledged, promised a change, and then watched nothing change. I was not punishing anyone. I was not being vindictive. I simply had reached the point where I understood that words in this house were not producing results, and that the only language left available to me was action. I met with my banker on a Thursday morning. I removed my stepdaughter's mother, my wife, as an authorized user on the joint account. I changed the account number. I set up a new debit card for myself and had the old one deactivated. I redirected my pension deposit to my long-standing personal account. I set up a separate bill, pay for the mortgage and the utilities only. Those would continue to be paid. I was not going to let the house suffer. But the open access household account was gone. He didn't ask me many questions. He'd been my banker for 11 years. He was professional and quiet, and at one point he simply looked at me and said, "You doing okay?" I said I was. I thanked him. I drove home by way of the long route, through the old neighborhood where I grew up, past the house where my parents had lived for 31 years, and where my father, a man who never raised his voice in my memory, had always said the same thing: handle your affairs like you'll have to explain them to yourself in 20 years. I was handling my affairs. When I got home, they were both in the kitchen. My wife was at the counter, and my stepdaughter was at the table with her phone in her hand. And I knew from the way they both looked at me that something had already happened. There was a charge they had attempted. Something had been declined. My wife spoke first. She asked me what I had done. I set my keys on the counter. I poured myself a glass of water. I took a breath the way you do when you want to make sure your voice is going to come out even. I told her I had made some changes to our accounts. She asked what kind of changes. Her voice was careful, not angry yet, still in the phase where she thought this might be a misunderstanding. I told her I had removed the joint account she and her daughter had been using and redirected my income. I told her the mortgage and utilities would continue to be paid. I told her I'd been watching unauthorized charges accumulate for over a year and had addressed it 4 times without seeing any change in behavior, and that I had decided to address it differently. My stepdaughter put her phone face down on the table. I noticed that. The deliberateness of it. My wife said that this was not something I should have done without talking to her first. She said it felt like a betrayal. I let that word sit in the air for a moment. Betrayal. I thought about the handbag. I thought about the handbag. I thought about the spa. I thought about the evening I had found a charge for almost $300 from a subscription box service that had been running for 5 months without my knowledge. I thought about the 4 conversations, the 4 acknowledgments, the 4 promises that had not become anything. I told her that I understood she felt that way. I told her I had tried talking and that it had not produced results, and that I had done what I needed to do to protect what I had spent my working life building. She asked if I trusted her. She asked it the way people ask that question, when they already know they have given you reason not to. I told her that trust was not the issue. Action was the issue. My stepdaughter was quiet the whole time. She picked up her phone again, looked at it, put it down. I could see her recalibrating, working out what this meant for her specifically. My wife walked out of the kitchen. I heard the bedroom door close, not slammed, just closed, which in some ways is worse. I sat down at the table. My stepdaughter and I were alone for the first time in a long time. She was looking at the surface of the table when she asked me, quietly, what she was supposed to do now. I told her I didn't know what she was supposed to do. I told her that question was one only she could answer, and that I thought she had been avoiding it for a while. I told her I didn't say this with any cruelty. I said it because she was 31 years old, and I believe she was more capable than she had been allowed to demonstrate. She didn't respond. She got up and went to her room. That night was quiet in the way that houses get quiet when words have all been used up. My wife and I ate dinner on opposite ends of the table. She didn't look at me often, and when she did, her face was not angry anymore. It was something closer to worried, and I think she was beginning to understand that what had happened was not a moment of frustration that would blow over. It was a position. Over the next several days, she came back to me 3 times. Each time she approached it differently. The first time she was still hurt. She felt I had acted unilaterally, that I didn't consider her feelings, that I had embarrassed her daughter. I listened. I said I understood she felt that way and I was sorry she was hurting. I did not apologize for what I had done. She noticed that. She left the room. The second time she came with a kind of negotiation. Her daughter was trying. She'd had a difficult few years. Could we find some kind of middle ground? Could we set a monthly allowance from the household account? I sat with it. I told her I was willing to discuss a formal arrangement where her daughter contributed something to the household. Nothing punishing, just something. And where any financial support was agreed upon by both of us in advance. She said she'd think about it. The third time was different. She sat down across from me on the couch, and she was quiet for a long time before she spoke. And when she did, she said something I had not expected. She said she knew it had gotten out of hand. She said she had kept telling herself it was small amounts, and that her daughter needed the support, and that I could afford it, and that she had used all of those things to avoid having a harder conversation with herself. She said she didn't like who she had been in those moments. I looked at her for a long time. I thought about the 4 years before all of this, about why I had married her, about the things in her that were real and true and good. I thought about the fact that honesty, even late honesty, still counts for something, that it takes a kind of courage to sit across from someone and say, not just I am sorry, but also I was wrong in a way that was specific and clear. I did not tell her everything was fine, it wasn't yet, but I told her I heard her. Her daughter moved out 6 weeks later. She found a room in a shared house, about 20 minutes away, closer to some work she had started doing through a logistics company. It wasn't glamorous. It was full-time. When my wife told me, her voice had something in it I hadn't heard for a while, a kind of quiet pride, the kind you feel not because something turned out the way you wanted, but because something turned out better than you feared. I've been asked, a couple of times since, whether I would have done it differently, whether I should have drawn the line sooner. The honest answer is yes, on both counts. I should have had a clearer conversation before my stepdaughter ever moved in, about duration, about contribution, about what the end of the arrangement would look like. I should have escalated my concern the second time I saw an unauthorized charge, not the fourth. I made the mistake that a lot of us make, which is assuming that care and patience will eventually be reciprocated, that if you are kind enough and quiet enough and generous enough, the people around you will rise to meet you. Sometimes they do, and sometimes the kindest thing you can do, for them as much as for yourself, is to stop waiting for that and simply act. My father used to say that self-respect is not something you are given. It is something you demonstrate, repeatedly, in the small choices no one else sees. Standing in your kitchen at 6 in the morning, checking your statements, knowing your own numbers, deciding quietly what you will and will not accept. I am 62 years old. I worked for 34 years. I built something, and I am still here, in my house, watching the sun come up over the back fence on Tuesday mornings, coffee in hand. Nobody is spending what I built without my knowledge. Not anymore. And that, more than anything else, is what I want you to take from this. Not the drama of the confrontation, not the satisfaction of the declined card, not any of the moments that might seem like victory. Just this: it is never too late to draw the line. It is never too late to decide that what you have spent your life building deserves to be protected. And you do not have to be angry to be firm. You do not have to raise your voice to be heard. Sometimes the quietest thing you can do is the loudest statement you will ever make. If this story found you at a moment when you needed to hear it, I'm glad. And if you know someone else who needed to hear it too, pass it along. I'll see you in the next one.